We will be back in Malachi, chapter 2. And I'll warn you guys, this is a pretty serious passage. Struggling here. Malachi, chapter 2. Try adjusting this the other. I think whenever you get to the prophets in general, typically the messages are a little bit more sobering. But I do want to give you a little bit of just a heads up. Today we're speaking on marriage and divorce. And if you've been divorced, it does not make you a second-class citizen in heaven. I grew up in a family who went through multiple divorces. I was a kid when it happened, an adult when it happened, and it's never easy. And I know a lot of churches, at least that I grew up in, man, it was wild. If you've been divorced, they treated you like you were dirt. And we are not going to do that here. But just because it's a sensitive topic doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about it. We have to address the Word of God, and so hopefully today we can learn something and that we can take home with us and leave differently when we change. So let's look at Malachi chapter 2, and let's read verses 10 through 16. 10 through 16. Alrighty. Malachi chapter 2. Malachi starts out with this: Have we not all one Father? Hath not God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother, by profaning the covenant of our fathers? Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of the Lord which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. The Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar, out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. Verse 13, And this have ye done. You've covered the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regards not the offering any more, or receives it with goodwill at your hand. Yet you say, wherefore? In other words, for what reason? Why are you not receiving my gift? Verse 14, it says, Because the Lord has been witness between thee and the wife of your youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously, yet she is your companion and the wife of thy covenant. And did he not make one, yet the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore, or why one, that he might seek a godly seed? Therefore take heed to your spirit, let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. Verse 16, For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away, or he hates divorce, in other words. For one man covers violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. Let's pray. Lord, we need your help this morning. This is a sensitive topic, and I don't want to say anything to offend anyone, Lord. I just want to speak your truth in love. And Lord, I pray that for those that are here this morning, maybe hurting or broken or confused, that you would meet their need according to your word. Lord, I can't do it. You're going to have to speak through me, and I'm asking you, please, if there's any sin that I haven't confessed, that you please forgive me of that. And Lord, I pray that this morning that we will get a clear picture on how you feel about this serious topic, Lord, this commitment. Lord, I ask for your help. It's in Jesus' name, amen. You know, we're celebrating Memorial Day weekend, and I've seen from plenty of people on Facebook that are in the military, they say, don't thank us veterans right now. He said, this day is for remembering those that have given their lives for us. And we think about their sacrifice this weekend. It's not just another day that we have off. It's supposed to be a time that we stop and reflect upon their sacrifice. The great sacrifice. I remember watching documentaries about the war, and you just see those boats crashing in the waves and the boats just hit the sand and those doors come down and the bullets screaming and stuff, and you think what they've done, what they've sacrificed so that we can have the freedom we have today. And you look at my generation as we spit in the face of those people in total disregard, no respect for the country, no respect for the sacrifice given. And you just hang your head and you think if they only knew, if they only understood the sacrifice that was made. You know, we spend this day remembering those that gave their lives. But I always wondered if they could come back, what would be their message? Those that are saved and gave their lives, that we could talk to them and say, hey, if you could give us any advice, what would it be? Now, I can't dogmatically say this, and maybe I shouldn't even make this connection or demonstration or whatever, but I really think they would say, you know, I gave up my life so that you could have freedom. And I really believe what they would say is, you need to love God, you need to love your family, and you need to love others. I really think that they would say something along those lines. I was reading a book, and it was talking about the history of Rome, and there was this man, I have it in my notes, so I have to look at his name if you guys want it, but he wrote a book talking about the downfall of Rome and what caused that. And he said there's 5 major keys that caused the downfall of Rome. It wasn't the enemies without that caused Rome, because Rome had conquered most of the world. He said what killed Rome was the enemies within. He said the number one reason why Rome fell, and I don't know if this author is a believer or not, but he said the number one reason why Rome fell, can you guys guess? Divorce. He said people were not taking their covenant and their commitment to one another seriously, that society would just hop from spouse to spouse, and by undermining the very first institution in the Bible, marriage, it undermines society. Number one thing. Number 2, religion. He said when people stopped being religious, it tore society apart. Is that not where we're at today? As I said, if you have been divorced, you're not second class, you're not looked down upon. It's just a reality of the situation. And I figured it would get quiet and get tight, but I'm not going to skip over what the Bible has to say. And here, Malachi is pleading with them. And if I could title the message today, it would be Don't Tread on Marriage. Don't tread on marriage. You guys have all seen those flags or the shirts with the snake that says, don't tread on me. If I could preach a message, it would be, don't tread on marriage. What do I mean by that? The first thing is that Malachi is saying, look at verse 10. He said, have we not all one Father? And this isn't speaking of the universal fatherhood of God that a lot of your crazy churches like to believe, that, oh, we're all brothers and sisters. Well, if you go read what Jesus said in the New Testament, when he was speaking to Pharisees, who were the Jewish race that had a pure bloodline, they were constantly arguing with him and saying, we're not of fornication, our father is Abraham. And he said, no, you are of your father, the devil, and the lusts thereof is what you're going to do. Now, if Jesus could say that about Pharisees, and most of us in here are Gentiles, basically what the Bible teaches is that if you are not saved, your father is Satan. What do I mean by that? If you go study out Ephesians chapter 2, you'll see that those that are not saved are just living according to the lust of their flesh. Whatever they want to do, sure, at times they'll say no to certain things, but for the most part, they are living their life entirely for themselves, disregarding God, because that's what Satan desires. And here Malachi is saying, have we not all one Father? He's referring to a specific group of people, God's chosen people, God's saved people, and he's saying, look, God is our Father. What he's doing is he's pointing back to Exodus when God took them out of captivity and led them through the Red Sea. And you can look at the verse in Exodus where it says this, God commands Moses to go to talk to Pharaoh, and he said, Israel is my son, my firstborn. Let my son go that he may serve me. This also goes back to chapter 1 of verse 6 where it talks about a man should honor his father. A woman should honor their father. So here he is. He's saying, look, we are believers. We have the same Father. So why in the world are we dealing treacherously with every man, with our brethren? The word treacherously has the idea of breaking faith, being unfaithful. Why are we being unfaithful to our family if we are children of God? Now, sure, we're not Israel, but in the New Testament it teaches that once you are saved, you are birthed and put into the family of God. For those of you who are saved this morning, whether you're part of the church or a member or not, you are our family. And Malachi is pleading, and he's saying, why are we being unfaithful to our brethren? And he specifies in verse 10 by saying, we are being unfaithful by profaning the covenant of our fathers. That word profane literally means to pollute or to not take seriously. And he's saying, you are polluting, you are not taking serious the covenant of our fathers. Who is he referring to? The fathers of the faith, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac. The covenants that God made with them, and specifically the covenant that God made with Moses on top of Mount Sinai when he gave the 10 Commandments. He's saying, you are polluting that. You are not taking it seriously. If we could bring it into modern application, it would be like us saying, why do we not respect the soldiers that have given their lives overseas? You're not taking it seriously. And I'm not preaching America or Christian nationalism, but I would compete and I would say, well, if you don't want Christian nationalism, what do you want? Muslim nationalism? Do you want globalism? Where China's in control? No, we don't want any of that. But that's about as political as we're going to get this morning. But what I'm saying is, he is saying, look, you are forgetting, you are stepping on the covenant that was made with our fathers. How are they doing that? How are they stepping on the covenant that was made? Well, verse 11 specifically says Judah. Now he gets down specifically to the group of people. And he said, Judah hath dealt treacherously. You have been unfaithful. And an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of the Lord which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. He's saying, Judah, you've been unfaithful. How have you been unfaithful? You have committed abomination. If you study out that word abomination in the Old Testament, it has the idea of something that is evil and it needs to be put to death. He's saying you are doing something that is so wrong that Malachi later on in the passage actually prays to God and asks for them to be wiped out. That's pretty serious stuff. So what is he saying? He's saying, look, you have profaned the holiness of the Lord. What does he mean by that? The word profane, I've already said, it means polluted or not taking seriously. As a matter of fact, it is the exact opposite of holy. Holy has the idea of being set apart for a special purpose. Did you guys know that if you are saved, you are holy and acceptable in the sight of God? Holy means he has set you apart for a specific purpose, for a specific reason, so that you will serve him and bring honor and glory to his name. Now, specifically for Israel, they were set apart as a designated nation that would have the tabernacle as the center. They would come and sacrifice to it, and they would not partake with the things that were going on in the nations around them, because God wanted them to be the witness and the testimony of who God was and who God is. But they weren't doing that. They got to the point where they were so struggling financially that they said, you know what? I'll just marry this lady of another tribe. God will understand. She's not saved. I'll marry her just so I can get out of my financial situation. You study out the economics during this time and you'll see that they were under inflation. We've talked about it before. Their leaders were inept. Modern translation, they were stupid. They only cared about themselves. Gas prices were through the roof. They didn't use gas back then, but I'm drawing the modern application here. Literally everything that we are facing today is the same thing that they were facing back then. There's nothing new under the sun. Solomon talks about that. And instead of trying to remain faithful to God in the tough times, they said, you know what, God? I don't care about my forefathers. I don't care about the sacrifices they made. I don't care about how hard they worked. You think about this. Their family had just left the exile in Babylon. Their whole lives were uprooted and taken to Babylon. They were finally granted permission to go back to their homeland. 200 years ago or 300 years ago before this, their families go, they make the sacrifice, travel all that distance to start a new life, to rebuild the temple, and now their descendants saying, I don't care the sacrifices that they made. I want to do what I want to do. I want to please myself. I don't care about it. And Malachi said, because you are only focused on yourself, because you only want to do what you want to do, you're not only hurting your brethren, but you're hurting your relationship with God. And we know that. I mean, selfishness is something to not be taken lightly. What do we need to do? Verse 10 teaches us that we need to stay faithful to God and to his family. The old saying that no man's an island. I remember when I was in Georgia and I was going through a tough time, my dad told me, he said, look, your actions are going to have repercussions. He said, if you throw a rock into a puddle of water, those waves are going to hit everything in the lake. And do you guys realize that whenever we partake in sin, even when we think that no one else knows, it has an effect on the entire body. It has an effect clearly on our relationship with God. Verse 11 and 12 teaches us that we need to stay faithful to God's ways and God's warnings. Look at verse 11. He said that you've profaned the holiness of the Lord. He's specifically referring to the tabernacle. They were getting so bold in their faith that they were bringing pagans into the sanctuary back in Jerusalem. That's a no-no. There's a little spot in the tabernacle for Gentiles, but they were bringing them all the way in. And God's saying, look, this is not it. You guys are completely missing the entire point. And he said, because of that, I'm sending you a warning. A lot of these messages are very, it seems like, aggressive and in your face, but God's purpose to warn you is to help you to get back on the right path, get back on the right way. And look what his warning is in verse 12. It's kind of a scary thing. Well, let me back up. Verse 12, what are they doing? They were marrying the daughter of a strange god. You study this out, you'll see that what they were doing is they were intentionally marrying someone who was under the lordship of a foreign god. This wasn't someone who was just lost. These are people who are completely dedicated to serving another god. And God says it's an abomination. It's a tough situation. You say, well, maybe you're here this morning and you're in a situation where you're married to a lost person or your spouse isn't saved. Is there hope? Well, yeah, there's hope, because 1 Corinthians and 1 Peter teaches that what you need to do, what your responsibility is to stay close to God, stay in fellowship with him, because through your testimony and through the testimony, if you have kids, God can use that to save them. So I'm glad that Paul and Jesus gave that explanation in the New Testament, because if not, it would seem pretty aggressive. He's saying, look, it's still possible. There's still hope. But he says in verse 12, Malachi was saying, look, the Lord will cut off the man that does this. Why is he so aggressive? Why is Malachi literally praying right now that God will end their life? He says, look, I pray that God will cut you off, the master and the scholar, out of the tabernacles of Jacob. If you guys study out this passage, you'll see that this is one of the most debated passages in all of Scripture. Actually, verse 15 is. It's the most difficult to translate. But he says, in totality, most of your scholars will agree that what he's saying is, as a whole, I don't care if it's a master, if it's a scholar, if it's someone super important, someone who you view as not as important, every single person who is intentionally doing this, I'm going to cut off. Why in the world is Malachi pointing this out and so strict with this? Look what they're doing. And at the end of verse 12 it says, "And him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts." Offers an offering. It's kind of redundant, but if you study it out, what's it referring to? What specific offering is Malachi talking about? I'll draw it out for you. Here they were, intentionally living in known sin, in open sin, where everybody around them knew what they were doing was wrong, and they still were coming to the tabernacle and presenting a specific offering to God. Guess what the offering was? It was a thank offering and a dedication offering. What does that mean? They were literally going to the house of God and saying, God, thank you for where I'm at. And because of who I am dedicating my life to you. And God's like, you can dedicate all you want, but if you're not living right, you're living in abomination. And obviously we aren't under the law anymore, we're under grace. But the application would be here is, how many times do we intentionally live in open sin, open rebellion against God, and then come to the church house, sing songs, shake hands with people, fellowship, maybe after the church go and eat and pretend like everything's all right, and we say we're dedicating our lives to God. Can I tell you what you cannot live in open sin and have a dedicated life to God. You know who you're dedicating your life to? Yourself. And all it's going to do is have a negative impact on you, your spouse, your children, and the entire body of Christ. We are not going to have a move of God in Laingsburg until we get serious about God. And how do we start? We get started with our relationships with one another, and primarily our marriages. We need to get serious about that. Verse 13, "And this have ye done again." I love modern translations of the Bible sometimes. In this verse it says, "And another thing." You ever been getting chewed out and your parents come to you and be like, "You were doing this, and another thing." Well, that's kind of what God's doing right now to the people of Israel. He's saying, "And another thing, this is what you're doing. You're covering the altar of the Lord with tears. You're weeping, you're crying out, insomuch that he regards not the offering anymore, nor receives it with goodwill at hand." What does that mean? Basically what they're doing is they're coming to the church house and they're getting super emotional. Now typically, if you guys have been to a church service and people are getting super emotional, maybe they're running the aisles. I can show you a YouTube video later of one person who runs down the aisle and jumps in the baptismal pool. It's crazy. You would think, my goodness, God showed up that day. We had a great time. I was crying. I was emotionally moved. That's not what it's all about. That's good. I'm glad when those things happen. I'm glad when God touches our heart. But if it's only about God touching our heart, we never make any correction and we never move towards Him in the right way, it doesn't mean anything. As a matter of fact, you study it out historically in the Western or in the Eastern culture, you'll find that what pagan cultures taught was if they come to a tabernacle, they would sacrifice an animal to the gods, because as powerful as the pagan gods were, they were limited in one way. You know what pagan gods couldn't do? They couldn't provide food for themselves. I'm not kidding. This is the craziness that they believed. They could not feed themselves. So they were at the mercy of man, worshiping them and providing them food. As a matter of fact, we took care of a widow lady who passed away this year. I would go over to her house, and every time she would make food, she would make a pot of noodles and stick it right in front of this little fat statue of Buddha. And I was like, "What are you doing? It's a waste of food." She's like, "Oh no, I'm feeding him. He comes during the night and eats the food." And I said, "No, Mei Chen, those are the rats that sneak in here and eat the food." She was a bit of a hoarder, but that's what they believed. They literally believed that if we don't worship, then the gods don't eat. Now, why did man sacrifice those pagan rituals? They would sacrifice what they're doing, sacrifice their animals so they could feed the god, because they believed that if they did that, God had to answer their prayer no matter what. No matter what. So they thought, it doesn't matter how I live, any way that I live, I can live in whatever sin that I want to, as long as I go to the temple, sacrifice an animal, God has to do what I'm asking him to do. Sounds a little bit like the prosperity gospel stuff we hear today. Put $1 in, get $1 million out, say 45 Hail Marys, and God will answer your prayer. You're going to make God do what you want him to do. I'm sorry, it don't work that way. As a matter of fact, God said, verse 14, he says he doesn't regard it, and he doesn't receive it with goodwill. He's saying, I don't even regard it. The word regard literally means to turn and look at. He's saying, I'm not even going to turn and look at what you're doing, the way you're worshiping me, because of the way that you are living. And I'm definitely not going to receive it. And then it says to receive it as goodwill. He said, I find no pleasure in what you're doing. None. Some people will say that the tears that are being spoken of here are the men that come and sacrifice because God's not answering their prayer. Another person teaches, and you guys can pick whatever one you want, whatever your conviction is. Another person says this verse is actually referring to the wives that they had divorced. Because during that culture, women, they seemed to have no rights. So what these men were doing is, because they were either wanting to get out of poverty or they wanted to upgrade, they would divorce their wives, and God said, I can hear their tears and their crying and their broken hearts, and I'm not paying anything attention to what you're doing because of their cries and how you're treating your wife. I don't know which is which, to be honest with you guys, but I could see both. And let me find this quote if I can. You think about that. If that's really what that's teaching, you see that God is a God of love, man. He is considering what those ladies are going through. Let's go to verse 14. And yet ye say, wherefore? Or for what reason? Why is God not regarding my sacrifice? Why is he not receiving my sacrifice? Why is he not pleased with the way that I am living? Well, Malachi says, because the Lord has been witness. He has testified between thee and the wife of your youth. What does that word witness mean? It literally, when we think of it, we think of someone going to court, standing before a judge and say, Judge, this is what I saw. This person was doing this, and I saw this, blah, blah, blah. No, in the biblical context of the Old Testament, the word witness literally has the idea of someone being a third party between two people getting married and enforcing that they stay to the vows that they made. What God is saying is, when you said I do, I was there. And I am there to enforce the fact that you said I do and she said I do. I was present at that marriage. There's an old billboard the man was talking about. He said, I drove by, and on it said, the wedding was great. Invite me into your home, God. Many of us want God to be a part of the ceremony, but man, we don't want him to be a part of our daily lives. So here he is. He's saying, look, I've been witness. I have seen the way that you're living. And he said, I am witnessing between thee and the wife of your youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. You've been unfaithful, yet she is thy companion in the wife of your youth. You know, we're supposed to love God, love his family, heed his ways, his warnings, and we need to stay faithful to God in worship. We don't need to think that we can just live any way we want to and come in here and think that God's going to accept it. He's not going to. I'm sorry, that God is loving, he's caring, but he's also just, and he wants his children to live right. We see he wants to be faithful in worship. And then verses 14 through 16 specifically, God wants us to stay faithful to God by loving our wives. By loving our wives. Ladies, there are some things in here as well for you, but specifically, Malachi and God are speaking directly to men. And this would be a good Father's Day message, but wasn't going to skip over it. What does he say? How do you need to love your wife? Well, first off, she needs to be your friend. Look at that word companion there. It literally means a friend, but it's also a picture of someone who pours concrete and hardens something together. Or it's kind of like, see, there's one in here, it's got to be. There's a mold in the wall or a seam that you know is something that is welded together. Why in the world is he saying that? Why is he saying that your wife needs to be your friend? She needs to be the concrete. You guys need to be tight together. Why? Because you're providing a foundation to build your entire life upon. You need to be a foundation. You want to have successful kids. You want to have a successful family. You want to do the right thing. You want to see them grow up and serve the Lord. It starts with your relationship with one another and taking that seriously. Not saying that they still can't do what's right, but this is the best opportunity for them. I mean, like I said, I grew up in a home. Sundays were the worst day. I know you guys have been there, and I've told you, I'm going to tell you again. Go to church, we sing the songs, we stand up, we sit down, we take the offering, we hear the preaching, we go home, and it is a knockdown, drag out, cussing, food throwing, vacuum throwing, crazy time. And it is by the grace of God that I'm saved, because there was a time in my life where I said, you know what? If that's Christianity, I don't want any part of it. And I walked away. I thought, that ain't real. Thank God he showed me who he really is. It's not about religion. It's about a relationship. But he says you need to love your wife. She needs to be your companion. Needs to be your friend, the wife of the covenant. Why? What is the point? Why do we have a foundation? Why does she need to be our friend? Because in verse 15 it says, did he not make one? And you guys can study this out. Verse 15 is the most argued about verse in the entire scripture of Bible because it is the most difficult to translate. But at the end of the day, when all the scholars get done arguing with one another, they say the point of the passage is this, right in the middle of the verse. that he might seek a godly seed. You guys know this. What was the point of Israel? Why did he want them to stay pure? Why did he want them to have godly relationships? Because one day Jesus was coming, right? 300 years later, Jesus shows up on the scene. They needed a pure line. Why do you think throughout history Satan has tried everything he can to destroy Israel, to destroy the seed? Because in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, God promises that he was going to send a seed. He was going to send a Messiah. And he said, look, the whole point of this is for a godly seed. You guys are corrupting that point. And on top of that, the whole reason why they were exiled in the first place is because of idolatry. They were committing abominations and they were marrying people outside of their religion. So, he says a godly seed. What's the application for us? You know, God wants us to have godly families. We need to have the foundation. We need to love our wives. We need to be friends with our wives. Why? So that we can give them the best opportunity to produce a godly family. I'll be honest with you guys. I'll be transparent. Here is a place where I have a lack of faith. You wonder why I don't have kids yet? I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm terrified that I'm not going to do a good job and they're not going to follow the Lord. Statistically, you look at the church and you look at how many people have left the church who have had great families growing up. I can name preacher after preacher after preacher that have kids that are no longer serving God. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous preachers right now, John Piper, his son is an atheist, avid atheist. And it terrifies me. And it's an area that I have a lack of faith because I know that we are supposed to be fruitful and multiply. So I pray that you guys will help me in that area. Just being transparent with you. We need a godly family. And it's not that I doubt my wife. I'm not saying that. You guys just know what I'm saying. It's a scary challenge. It's the most difficult thing that I'm assuming that it'll ever do. But look what he says too at the end of verse 15. He said, therefore take heed to your spirit. That word take heed is literally the exact same Hebrew word that he uses back in chapter 1 of the priests that were supposed to guard the law. You know what our duty as men is? We are supposed to protect our spirit. Modern application. When you see that your eyes start lingering, people you shouldn't, you need to take heed of your spirit. You need to do whatever it takes possible to protect your relationship with your wife. Why? Because Satan wants to destroy that. When the family goes, society goes, and that's where we're at today. And at the same time, he said, against the wife of his youth. If you look that up, you'll see that it's actually in the plural. This isn't a singular thing. This isn't just youth. What he's saying is, he's saying, the wife of your youth. I want you to encapsulate, think about the fact of when you married her. He's saying, think of your entire relationship that you had with this woman. The one that you loved, one that birthed your children, the one that you spent all these good times with, you had all these memories with, and now you toss her to the side as if she means nothing. And I want to throw out the caveat that the Bible does have grounds for divorce. I'm not going to skip over that. Jesus himself said that for the case of fornication, if your spouse cheats on you and leaves you, you have every right to get a divorce and to remarry. That's biblical. On top of that, desertion. That's in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where if your wife leaves you or your husband leaves you, you don't have to break your heart to God as in, God, how do I please you now? No, you can still please God. You can still live for God. You can still do the things that are right if your spouse deserts you. And then, if you're married to a lost person and you have the ability and they want to live peacefully with you, God says, look, you do everything you can to strengthen your testimony. Everything you can, because you don't know how your influence on them could possibly win them. And that's what we need to be. But he's saying, look, the wife of your youth, think about all those memories. I'm probably in the memory stage. I've only been married for 3 years. I could tell you some funny stories and start crying, all that, but we'll skip that part. She needs to be our friend. What's the other one here? Our teammate. Man, good luck doing life on your own. That's tough. And I'm thankful that we have the family of God, but there's nothing like being able to have someone to turn to in tough times. Also, to have someone who's strong enough to look you in the eye and say, look, you were being stupid. You shouldn't have said that. I may get that after this message. I don't know. Hopefully some of you guys are willing to do that as well. But she needs to be our friend. She needs to be our teammate. And lastly, We need to be the protector. Now I want to show you guys a few verses and we'll get out of here. Look what verse 16 says. For the Lord, the God of Israel, says that he hates putting away. He hates divorce. For one covereth violence with his garment. What are you trying to say? You want to talk about studying this out, getting confused, because this is very confused. But he said, saith the Lord of hosts, therefore take heed to your spirit. What is he saying in this verse? He is basically saying that whenever you divorce your wife, you are committing violence to her. Especially in that day and age. My goodness, you divorce your wife, put her out on the street because she wasn't good looking. Good luck with her finding anyone else. You know what I mean? It was a struggle. That's why they were so brokenhearted. But at the same time, he said, you have violence on your garment. Now, typically what we wear, people can see what we've been doing. Like clearly, I got this thing steamed this morning. Maybe it doesn't look like it too well, but I probably should have ironed it a little bit more. But what God is saying here, Malachi is saying here, is that whenever you get a divorce, this isn't something you're going to be able to hide. It's going to be well known about you and your character. And at the same time, it fills the land with violence. I didn't understand this until I studied this passage out. But you guys remember in Genesis chapter 6, right before he sends the flood, do you know what he says? Why he's going to flood the earth? Because the land is filled, guess what? Same word, violence. Jesus quotes a verse, and I'd never seen this until I studied it out. Sorry about the mic. But this is what Jesus had to say. I never saw this passage until studying out Malachi. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 37 to 39. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. What's he saying there? It's not that they were just having a good time. He was saying the land was filled with violence, and part of that violence was they were constantly getting married and remarrying and exchanging in marriage. You can look up that Greek word. It doesn't just mean giving in marriage. It means giving in exchange of marriage. My goodness, you look at the celebrities today and they're married for a week. They literally change their spouse more than they change their underwear. Just constant. And he says that that was part of the violence that caused the entire earth to be flooded, was the way families were treating one another. That's tough stuff. And I'm not here this morning to beat anyone down. Maybe you've never heard anything like this. Maybe you didn't know that the family was this serious. And you say, you know what, I've made mistakes, I've messed up. You know what, there's forgiveness in Jesus Christ. You think about Jesus, you think about God's plan. My goodness, all the way throughout Scripture, Jesus is referred to as the person God is, that he married them. And he, even at one point in God's relationship with Israel, he wrote them a bill of divorcement because they were so rebellious, so unfaithful. If you're struggling this morning, maybe your spouse has been unfaithful, God understands that pain. He knows what it's like to be cheated upon, to be hurt, to be betrayed. He understands that. But you know what? Even though Israel treated him the way that he did, even though Israel did everything they could and turned their back upon him, he still went to the cross and died for them because he loved them. You know what that means for us as men? Regardless of whatever we're going through, we should strive with all of our ability to be faithful to our wives, to forgive them, to be steadfast. Why? Because just as marriage is a picture of Jesus in the church, we are to love our wives the same way that Jesus loved the church. That is a challenge. Ladies, next time you get frustrated with us, remember, we have the responsibility to love you the same way Jesus loves the church. That is very difficult. It's not easy. We don't have a piano player this morning, but I would ask that you please stand with your head bowed and eyes closed. I'm going to ask you, what's the best way to honor those other than just remembering the sacrifice they've made? Living for them. I'll leave you guys with this. There's a preacher who passed away in 1994. His name was Leonard Ravenhill. And he's buried in a place in Texas called the Garden Valley Cemetery. On his tombstone, before he passed away, he asked them to write this. You can see the date he was born, the day he died, but underneath of it, it said this: are the things that you are living for worth Christ dying for? This morning I ask you, are the things that you are living for right now worth Christ dying for? Lord, we thank you. Thank you for the day. Lord, I pray for those this morning that are maybe struggling in the relationship, Lord, that they may turn to you. I don't know what everyone's going through, Lord. I only just am the tool in which you use. And Lord, I pray that if I've said anything unkind with the wrong spirit, I pray you forgive me. And Lord, I pray that the person, if they've seen it that way, that they forgive me as well. Lord, we love you. And I'm thankful for the fact that even whenever we daily turn our back upon you, that you cannot deny yourself and that you stay faithful to us. Lord, we deserve divorce if we're honest. We deserve for you to turn your back on us and to never even speak to us again for the way that we have treated you since we've known you. Lord, I'm thankful that you love us, you're patient with us, and that you will never give up on us, Lord. Lord, I thank you for your word. Lord, I understand that everyone's situation is different, and we have to take principles from Scripture to meet those situations. But Lord, I'm thankful that you love us, Lord, and that you're willing to guide us in whatever it is that we're facing. Lord, I thank you for the gift of salvation and the sacrifice that you've made. Lord, I pray that as we go home today that you keep us safe. It's in Jesus' name, amen.